Most of us in the modern world keep our feet locked up in shoes that allow very little articulation of the foot. In general, modern people are disconnected from their feet and have a hard time organizing movements with the different parts of their feet. We've been discussing the correct placement of the feet, but now we need to start using the feet to generate friction against the floor. First, let's look at how we can generate friction. For this, we will use our hand. All we need is a firm surface that is sturdy. A desk or table works well. Place your hand on the table. Try to push your hand away from you, along the surface of the table, but don't allow the hand to move. You're putting the force into your hand across the surface, but not actually moving the hand. What happens when you do this? You should feel a force that pushes backwards. What you are doing is activating the muscles that extend the forearm away from the torso. And as that force creates friction between your hand and the table, the friction creates a force that pushes back. If we generate friction with our feet, we can use that force to our advantage. But before we get there, we'll need to define a few points on the foot. The first is one we're at least a little familiar with. We will call it the head of the first metatarsal. If you raise your big toe, you will see a round surface that is in contact with the floor. There's a bone there. It's the head of the first metatarsal. The second point we will define is on the heel. If you put your index finger and thumb on either side of your heel, you can find the center of that distance. Just inside of the center, around 1/3 of the distance from the inside of the foot, is what we will call the interior of the heel. Why is the interior of the heel here and not closer to the inside of the foot, you might ask? If you were to look at the bone of the heel with an X-ray, you would see that there is no bone on the inside of the heel. There is dense tissue there, which feels like bone because it's quite strong, but it's not bone. The bone starts near the middle of the heel. If we look at the structure of the foot and leg in an image like this, we are reminded why the weight should be on the inside of the foot and not the outside. The tibia is not directly over the heel. It's over the talus, which is on the inside of the foot. It would be more stable if the tibia was directly above the calcaneum, but having them offset like this allows us to have a spring in our step. Our legs are not built only for stability. Mobility is extremely important. If you tip a structure like this towards the outside, the weight will pull it back towards the middle. But if you habitually pull your weight onto the outside of your feet, as many people do, you will end up tipping onto the outside of the foot, and that will pull this whole structure towards where there is no support. You will then have to compensate for an out-of-balance lower leg by bending the leg. This is part of why nearly everyone feels like they have to bend themselves to feel balanced. We would expect that if the lower leg were tipped out of balance like this, that would have some pretty extreme effects. If you look at someone from the side, you can see that the lack of support from the lower leg contributes to the drooping forward of the pelvis and upper leg. This contorts and twists the legs. We will examine this in more detail soon, but think about what I've said concerning the feet and lower leg, and see if you can't come up with an idea of what's going to happen as a result to the inside of the knee and upper leg. Give it some thought. But back to the task at hand. Let's see how we can get friction through our feet. Remember how we extended the muscles of our arm to get friction against the table with our hand? We're going to do something similar with our feet, using the muscles that extend the lower leg. This will be easier to start working with while seated. The direction will be to pull the interior of the heel towards the head of the first metatarsal, but we don't want the foot to actually move. Just like our hand did not move on the table, our feet will not move. So make sure you're not on a surface where your feet are going to slide. Sometimes we use the word pull to mean move, like when you pull your lower ribs back, that's a movement that can be seen. Other times, you will not actually see a movement when you pull on a bone or bony structure. You are essentially activating a muscle, even though there is no visible movement. This direction for the heel will not itself be a visible movement, although the effects will be visible, and I will show you that shortly. I've had students say they cannot pull the interior of their heel towards the head of their first metatarsal because they don't have any muscle that does that. But of course, you have muscles that connect the back of the foot and the front of the foot. You can activate those muscles to pull. That is what we want. We want to lengthen the foot by engaging these muscles in the feet that are often ignored. This will affect more than just the foot. People are typically shortened at the back of their foot into their calf. The clear evidence of this is that many people cannot sit in a chair with their feet flat on the ground. Unless they move their feet forward, their heels will be up off the ground. You can see this more starkly if you watch someone crouch down. The vast majority of people will lift their heels off the ground. It's the only thing that feels possible to them because they cannot maintain lengthening between their heel and the back of their calf. This procedure will be a first step towards lengthening the lower leg. Remember, the direction is to pull the interior of the heel forward towards the head of the first metatarsal. If your feet are placed correctly, there will be an angle to this trajectory. By pulling the interior of the heel towards the first metatarsal, you will generate friction that can visibly change the condition of your legs and your torso. I encourage you to film yourself while you do this, because it will be tough for you to appreciate the full effect without seeing what's happening. This procedure has great effect in the course of an initial Alexander technique lesson, and so I'm going to show you a clip from one of my earliest lessons in which I first used this procedure. As you can see, I'm intently watching my feet, because Jeando told me to see what happens to my instep. Really, he is distracting me with that. What he's actually interested in is what will happen to my torso and legs. Since I'm focused on my feet, he knows I'm not intentionally doing anything with my torso. But as you can see, my torso changes rather dramatically, even though I did nothing to change it. This is the effect of getting friction with my feet along the floor. And this is something that you can use when you're sitting, anytime, anywhere. One little tip that will help you get this effect is to make sure that the outsides of your knees are in line with your iliacs. To do that, just grab a ruler or sturdy stick and place it on the outside of your iliac. Then move your knee so that the outside of it is against the ruler. Then give yourself the direction to pull the interior of the heel towards the head of the first metatarsal. If all this has been easy enough for you, you can help the friction on the floor to lift your ribcage by consciously ordering yourself to lift the ribcage up away from the pelvis. Or, if you want to be more specific, lift the ribs at the back of the armpit up away from the sit bones. In the next episode, we will look at sitting, something we all do despite not really understanding much about it. So here's a question for you. When you're sitting, where should the front of your ankle be in relation to your knee? In front of the knee, directly under the knee, or behind the knee? What do these different positions do to the lower leg? Give it some thought and then join me next episode, and we will look at how to sit.